another successful event.
Did you authorize it, sir?
Everybody knows exactly what happened. And what I do is I authorize my military. We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately.
President Trump talking about the authorization of the dropping of the MOAB. This is the technical term, is the Massive Ordnance Air Blast, but it's also nicknamed the mother of all bombs. It's 11 tons of explosives. They dropped it in Afghanistan, going after ISIS fighters in tunnels and caves in the Nangarhar province. This is a testing video of this massive bomb that the military came up with during Iraq, but never used. And it does send a message, no matter what you think about it. It is a massive blast. We don't know the damage that it caused in that area, but we do know it does send a message not only in Afghanistan, but also around the world. And this comes as obviously foreign policy is leading the day with President Trump. Let's bring in our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for The Washington Times. Kristen Soltis-Anderson, columnist for The Washington Examiner and GOP pollster. Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics co-founder and publisher, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Charles, the mother of all bombs.
Well, it's curious as to why here and why now.
Let me just interrupt you. The president just landed in Florida as Air Force One is landing there for the Easter weekend as he heads down to Mar-a-Lago in Florida. We just wanted to bring the shot of Air Force One landing as you continue. Go ahead.
I suspect from what they tell us, this was an ISIS base, ISIS tunnels, which tells you, number one, that ISIS is more entrenched than we would have thought. You have this notion of ISIS being sort of a band of jihadis running around, but this is pretty entrenched. But I suspect it's because it was isolated, so you didn't have the risk. The reason this is a hard bomb to use is because the radius is half a mile, and you're likely to catch civilians and innocents in the blast. So this may be because of the isolation. But I think you're right. There's also a message here. After all, this was developed in 2003, so we're 14 years later. Why now? I think we're trying to send a message, particularly to the North Koreans, perhaps also the Iranians. They're developing nukes. The nukes are buried. They're intended to be in places that are highly reinforced. And this is a way of saying we can get there. And if you do it in an isolated place in Afghanistan against the public enemy number one in the world, ISIS, it's a way to demonstrate the efficacy of the bomb.
You know, we said earlier in the week, Tom, that this president is not that ideological. He is more practical, and he's looking for W's, wins. If you turn to the Pentagon and say, give me some wins, they've got a long list of things that they can produce W's. Right. And who knows, this may be another one after the Syria launch.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of those things where I think Trump received, pretty bipartisan praise for the action that was taken in Syria. One of the other messages, too, Charles, is that he had said that during the campaign he was going to bomb the heck out of ISIS, and this is a reinforcement of that promise, because as the focus is on foreign policy, right, and there's questions about, making America great again. What are we doing here? The people who elected Trump wanted him to focus on stuff here at home, and instead we're now focused on all these things abroad. I think that's one of the reasons he also mentioned, quite frankly, the other day in his joint presser, that saying the world is a mess. It's a nasty place, sort of indicating that these are things that I didn't want to do, but they're there, and I've got to take care of them.
Is it a change, do we think, Kristen, for his foreign policy that he campaigned on and what we're seeing currently?
Well, he definitely, as was mentioned, say that he was going to bomb ISIS. So there are some other words involved in that promise. So this is actually right in line, and it's not hard to imagine President Trump going to his advisors at the Pentagon and saying, what's the biggest bomb you've got that I can use? And so this is
the highest rated.
It's quite literally keeping his promise. But I think what's also interesting is it's a reminder that ISIS is not just in Iraq and Syria, that ISIS is now no longer just contained in this one region of the world relevant to one set of conflicts that we are engaged in, but rather is a movement that is spread to a variety of other conflict zones where we have American interests.
Charlie.
Yeah, you know, a lot has been made over the last couple of days about how it seems to be that Trump is sort of stepping away from a lot of his campaign promises by getting involved in Syria and now doing this in Afghanistan. But I actually see it as very much in line with it, because it is about the message in both places. And that message is a very much an America First message, and it's a message that you know that goes to all, as you all said, you know, all these other countries, North Korea and Iran. That look, the years of pacificity are over. We are going to look out for our interests and drop bombs if that's what is in our best interest.
So. And that's one of the things about Washington, is that they're so firm, Charles, about you said this and now you're doing this. But presidents evolve. They have more information. They have classified briefings. They have advisors. And everything is not political. Sometimes it comes after advisors are advising.
Look, that is so. But the strike on Syria was not something that is a tweak or a slight deviation from what he ran on. And forget about what he ran on. The inaugural address is a way for a president to express his philosophy, what he believes. The inaugural address, the foreign policy section, is radically non-interventionist. It is America First, repeated over and over. It talks about how the world has sucked dry our vital bodily juices, to quote Dr. Strangelove. That was not Trump, that was the mad scientist. But it says, and that was our allies.
Thanks for the clarification.
He's talking, yeah, I know, otherwise I get a lot of tweets on this. He's talking about our allies. He's talking about how the world has stripped the middle class of its wealth. And the reason it's a radical departure is because in the inaugural address he defines national interest very narrowly. And here what we are back to is the traditional American understanding of national interest as a broad definition, going all the way back to Harry Truman, in which we define our interest as worldwide. Otherwise, well, what is Syria to us?
All right, well, we don't really know what the Trump doctrine is yet, but he's winning, isn't he?
Yes, I welcome this. I'm not an America Firster. I thought it was a mistake to enunciate a doctrine in the inaugural address, which is we're coming home. It scared the bejeebies out of our allies in NATO when he talked about it being obsolete. It scared in the Middle East, the Gulf Arabs were scared to death. I think this is reassuring that we are returning to the classic American definition, where we include our allies, and the most important, we accept world leadership in a way that had not been accepted by Obama and seemed to be not accepted by Trump, the candidate.
Tom, one of the things that is clear, that labeling China a currency manipulator is not happening. And perhaps that is the art of the deal in this president, as he just met with the Chinese president. Here's Mark Lauder today talking about that.
What President Trump's leadership is showing is that we're actually getting results. So as opposed to worrying about labeling China as a currency manipulator, the president and the Chinese are working together along with other global partners, and we're seeing an end to the Chinese currency manipulation. Obviously, the president can always revisit issues as the events may change, but right now the signs are positive.
I mean, that's probably the most stark, the most black and white difference from the campaign. But China is turning away North Korean coal. They seem to be making some moves on North Korea. They're seeing progress, at least the White House says so.
Yeah, and Trump has done sort of a 180. I mean, he just today called Xi a special person, or, you know, he really has this sort of, is showing this affection for him just based on their one meeting. So that is a pretty stark change, and that's one of the things, because, again, if you're talking about an America First...
Looking at the president disembarking here in Palm Beach. Keep talking, sorry.
If you're talking about an America First, sort of an economic populist message, China being one of our primary adversaries was a key component of that during the campaign. And so, look, I think in the end, it's going to come down for Trump to results. I don't know that his base is necessarily going to care who's leading Syria or you know, what's going on with China necessarily, as long as he's producing results for the people who put him into office in the first place.
And isn't that the bottom line, Kristen? If you look back at the election, you look back at what people said they wanted stuff done, right?
You mentioned that Donald Trump is not particularly ideological. I think most voters aren't particularly ideological. They want to see stuff done. And so if that means You go into your presidency thinking we're going to be nicer to Putin and we're going to be tougher on China, and before your 100 days are up, you realize we're going to be tougher on Putin and nicer to China. You flip the way you're thinking about those two countries. If it's in service of other goals, of figuring out what we're going to do in Syria, where we're kind of on the other side of Russia, or in North Korea, where our interests are aligned with China, I think it makes sense to be nimble and make those changes if you think it's going to lead to the results that your voters expect.
Yeah, and the question about results with Congress is a whole different ball of wax.
Especially since Republicans control Congress. But as I've said many times, I think it's great that you have Republicans in Congress and a Republican in the White House, and that they're not just rubber stamping one another. I think it's great for America. But we have to remember there's a big difference between flying 59 Tomahawk missiles into Syria and launching a $3 trillion war with ground troops. And that's why I don't think that he is really going back on his campaign there. As long as he accomplishes something on immigration, the economy, most importantly, and fighting terrorism, his people will stick with him.
Just talking to military advisors and some senior defense officials, they feel a little bit unchained with their ability to do things without the legal bouncing off and red tape that they saw just months ago.